Okay, we have been looking at Harvey's, no, David Harvey. I keep saying Harvey. That's a more of an American pronunciation. I think it's just David Harvey. Harvey's typology of theories, different types of theories. And last time we looked at his definition or explanation of discipline, what discipline is. And that was important because theories work within discipline. So today we are going to look at we divide theories into three kinds of theories. And we started with the working definition of theory last time. And that was the one we just picked up from, I think it was Oxford Dictionary. So I'll just go back and reflect on the meaning of theory first, and then we'll look at three types of theory which David Harvey comes up with and any implication it has for the topics we are interested in. So theory, according to one of the dictionaries, I think it is Oxford Dictionary, is supposition or a system of ideas. Intended to explain something. So generally speaking, there is a problem, and then there's solution, and so theory is part of solution system intended to explain. So theory is in a sense a solution, part of solution of problem. But in order to solve a problem, you have to understand the problem. So theory help you to do that, and you have to describe the reality in which the problem is situated, and all of this constitute disciplines. We saw disciplines are the divisions of labor, I guess, to start with anyway. So we divide different areas of study according to disciplines based on the type of problems they study and type of theories they use, like theories in the sense general method as well, and solutions. So we categorize different disciplines according to the problem they study and the way they study them. Okay, I think that much is enough. We can proceed to the types of theories Harvey is trying to conjure up. So the first type of theory he calls status quo theory. That is, you can also say a dominant theory or widely accepted theory at the moment, or in a specific society or in a specific regime of knowledge. So status quo theory is a theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to portray. So as we said, one of the things which a theory does is describe the reality, because the problems are located within a particular reality or particular perception of reality. So a theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to portray, and which accurately represents the phenomena with which it deals at a particular moment in time. Accurately represents the representation phenomena with which it deals at a particular moment in time. Okay, there are some important terms here, so let us look at them one by one, and then we'll come back to understand the meaning of status quo theory on the whole. Okay, so the first thing which comes up in here is that a theory must be grounded in reality. Because it is in the context of a particular reality that problems which theory tries to explain are problems are understood, in fact arise in the first place in the context of a particular reality or particular conception of reality, and also in particular context they become problem and then they are explained. So theory must be grounded in a particular reality. A theory which is not grounded in reality might be called idealistic theory, or whatever term you want to use, but the thing is how we understand reality in the first place. So with reality we should ask the question of, there are many things which we can say about reality. Like one of the easiest thing to say is there are always different conceptions of reality. Even if it's one reality, if we assume there is the reality, and depending on your conception of reality, a reality would the reality of reality would vary, or the reference of the reality you are referring to would vary according to your conception of a reality. Another thing we can say is that you might be dealing with different realities themselves, not just conception, because realities can change over time. They can change across space, but they can also change in the sense that we can, by artificially or humanly isolating certain aspects of reality and making them dominant, we can also construct reality, like we do in experiments, scientific experiments. A lot of science is, in fact, it is based on observation and all those things, but observation and all those things are secondary. The main thing is experiments for experiment, you actually construct the reality. And that doesn't mean that that reality is unreal, but that reality you are describing exists only if certain conditions are fulfilled, and cease to exist when those conditions are done away with for whatever reason. So in all those sense, we have different notions of reality, or different meanings of reality. So even when we say theory must be grounded in reality, even though it is a very important statement, on its own it doesn't tell us too much, because reality, as I said, can have different meaning, at least 3 or 4 meaning we just looked at. So that's why I think David Harvey specify what reality is talking about by saying a theory which is grounded in the reality which it seeks to portray. So a theory doesn't just describe reality, it does. It also specifies a reality. Specifies a reality which it is describing. So every theory is based on a particular, we can say a particular type of reality, or particular conception of reality which it tries to portray, and which it tries to represent. So representation is important, but so theory represent reality accurately. But this representation is specified in the context of a theory itself. So it is correct to say that theory in a sense in inverted comma creates specifies the general contours of reality which it then tries to accurately represent and portray. In other words, theory description of reality an accurate description of reality, and then identification of problems and solutions can't be divorced from the fact that the theory, in a sense, just to be dramatic, creates that, in inverted comma, creates that reality in the first place. So the theory's description of reality cannot be divorced from its interpretation of that reality. And in that sense, it's never a pure description of an objective reality, because the theory itself defines the standards of objectivity and the standards of what is real and what is not real, and what is included and what is excluded, etc. So go back to the text. Let's see if something is cleared up. Status quo theory is a theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to portray, but it also provides a condition for the appearance of that reality, or understanding of that reality in the first place, and which accurately represent the phenomena, even though phenomena and its understanding itself is grounded in theory itself, so with which it deals at a particular moment in time. But by having ascribed a universal truth status to the proposition it contains, it is capable of yielding prescriptive policies. Prescriptive policies. What do we mean by prescriptive policies? Which can only which can result only in the perpetuation of the status quo. So this is basically the same thing which we said in different words. So let's look at this as well. So the theory describe accurately reality which at least in part it itself create. So in this sense, any theory is description as well as prescription. And which means that theory doesn't just say describe that how the reality is, but it also tells you how the reality should be. That's why so description can never be totally, obviously it varies from problem to problem, but totally can't. It can't be divorced from, or totally divorced from prescription And this gap between description and prescription varies. Generally people think that in natural sciences this gap is less, and in social sciences it's more, and even in natural sciences, depending on uh, what type of or what area we are studying, it can vary. But there are two things to be remember. In theory, description is always there, and prescription is always there, and these two things cannot be totally divorced from each other the way the theory works. And one example of this is how economics work, for example. So firstly, economics works within the conditions of capitalism, the conditions under which capitalism works and creates. And in that sense, it describes accurately those conditions. But to the extent that those conditions are not totally realized, it also always telling us how should it work, but tells us that in terms of how it actually runs. So it and should question is always there. So in that sense, economists never accept their mistakes, and people are baffled by that, but that's because they are always dealing with these two things, how it is and how it should be. And they always see reality of how it is in terms of how it should be. And in their mind, prescription is the real description, because that's the reality which should exist and would exist if people implement the conditions which are necessary for its existence. So that's the dynamic. And the other thing is, as long as a theory is hegemonic, that is, it's dominant and more, it creates the reality, it describes the reality, it solves and explains the problems arising from that reality, and it also explains why this reality should continue. So or in other words, they also constantly and continuously, that theory reproduces the current reality in terms of how that reality is and how it should be. This constant reproduction is part and parcel of a theory. And in that sense, if a theory is hegemonic, wants to perpetuate, so part of the job of a theory is to reproduce the current reality and its dominance. And in that sense, the theory can be described as its status quo theory because it reproduces the reality which it has created and which it describes and which it sustains in part and reproduces. In that's why it's a status quo theory. And now the question of let's go back to the text first. So status quo theory, the theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to portray and which accurately represents the phenomena with which it deals at a particular moment in time. But by having ascribed universal truth status to the propositions it contains, it is capable of yielding prescriptive policies which can result only in the perpetuation of the status quo. Okay, now the question of universality, and I will finish with that. So, theory in part creates, describes, as well as prescribes the reality, trying to explain, and in that sense it's part and parcel of theory to reproduce the reality. And if the theory is hegemonic, then it is a status quo theory in the sense that it tries to perpetuate this description prescription dialect and combination of a particular type of reality is trying to create or perpetuate. But how is this related to the question of universality? Now, universality means that a theory claims that its descriptions and prescriptions are true for all times and all spaces. So they are universally true or universally applicable. But how is this claim of universality related to hegemony and perpetuation of status quo? Because a theory can in principle claim that, its description and prescriptions are universal only to the extent that the conditions are fulfilled which it describes for the existence and continuation of that reality. So, but in that sense, then it's not the question of universality, because even if its claims are universal, they are universal only in the context of in the context of a particular conditions which has to be fulfilled. So in as far as I can see, universality itself, universality as such is not necessary, or claim to universal is not necessary for status quo status of a theory. A theory can be consciously particularistic in the sense that it might be aware of the fact that, and even concede the fact that its claims are universal only in the context of the fulfillment of certain conditions. So in that sense, the question of universality, I think, is a secondary one. Okay, let's go back to the text and stop here. So, status quo theory is a theory which is grounded in the reality it seeks to portray and which accurately represents the phenomena with which it deals at a particular moment in time, but by having ascribed a universal truth status to the proposition it contains. We just saw that it doesn't have to ascribe universal truth status. It can easily claim that truth status is um, dependent on or supervene on the fulfillment of certain conditions which are particular or specific or particularistic. It is capable of yielding prescriptive policies by which can result only in which can result only in the perpetuation of the status quo. So, I mean, universalism is, at least certain sort of universalism is not necessary for status quo, etc. As postmodernism and other non-universalistic theories are proof of that. So I'll stop here and we'll continue this.